Black screen, silence. Then a low, distant siren. A map fades in Europe, night, borders glowing faintly. And then one light disappears, the United States. Gone, no warning, no gradual withdrawal, no transition, just absence. NATO remains, but its backbone is missing. A question echoes in the dark. What is NATO without the United States? For over 75 years, NATO has been one of the most powerful military alliances in human history. 30-plus nations, billions in defense spending. A promise written in stone, an attack on one is an attack on all, but beneath that unity lies an uncomfortable truth. NATO is not equal, it has never been equal, because one country has always carried more weight than all the others combined. The United States. Now imagine a world where that pillar is removed. No American troops stationed in Europe. No U.S. nuclear umbrella. No logistics. No satellites, no rapid response forces. NATO still exists, but the question is no longer about strength. It's about survival. To understand what happens next, we need to understand what NATO truly is. NATO is not just a treaty, it's a system. A network of command structures, intelligence sharing, military coordination, and political alignment. At its core lies Article 5, collective defense. Simple in theory, powerful in practice. But here's the reality. The United States contributes nearly 70% of NATO's total military spending. It provides the majority of advanced air power strategic bombers, aircraft carriers, missile defense systems, global surveillance satellites, and most importantly, nuclear deterrence. Without the U.S., NATO doesn't just lose a member. It loses its center of gravity. Let's imagine the moment it happens. The United States announces its withdrawal. Immediate, total, no phased plan, no negotiations. Within hours, global markets react. Currencies fluctuate. Defense stocks spike. European leaders scramble. Emergency summits begin. But the real shock is military, because overnight NATO's integrated command structure fractures. U.S. generals leave their posts. Joint operations halt. Shared intelligence pipelines collapse. The alliance is still there, but its nervous system is severed. Now comes the hard truth. Without the U.S., NATO's military capability drops dramatically. Europe still has strong armies. Countries like the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Poland maintain modern forces, but they face serious limitations. Logistics, coordination, rapid deployment. The U.S. military is not just large. It is globally integrated. It can move troops across continents in days. It can sustain long-term operations. It has unmatched air refueling capacity. Without that, NATO becomes slower, less flexible, less decisive. And in modern warfare, speed is everything. But the biggest shift is not conventional, it's nuclear. For decades, the United States has provided a nuclear umbrella over Europe. Deterrence. A silent promise that any attack would be met with overwhelming force. Without it, everything changes. Yes, the United Kingdom and France still possess nuclear weapons, but their arsenals are smaller. Their delivery systems are more limited. And more importantly, their political willingness to use them is uncertain. Would France risk Paris to defend Eastern Europe? Would the UK respond instantly to an attack on a Baltic state? These are no longer theoretical questions. They become strategic vulnerabilities. Now we must look east. Russia has always viewed NATO as a threat, but also as a challenge it must respect. Because NATO, backed by the United States, is overwhelming. Without the US, that balance shifts. Russia doesn't need to overpower NATO, it just needs to test it. Probe its weaknesses, exploit its divisions, hybrid warfare increases, cyber attacks intensify, disinformation spreads. And then a small move, not a full invasion, just pressure, a border incident, a contested region, a peacekeeping operation, something ambiguous, something that forces NATO to make a decision. And that's where the real danger begins. Imagine a crisis in Eastern Europe. A NATO member is threatened, troops mobilize, but hesitation creeps in. Without the United States, the cost of action feels higher, the risk feels greater, the unity feels fragile. Article 5 is invoked, but now it's no longer backed by American power, it's backed by European consensus. And consensus takes time, debates begin, delays emerge, and in warfare, delay is defeat. The credibility of NATO begins to crack, and once credibility is gone, deterrence disappears. Europe would not remain passive, far from it. The withdrawal of the U.S. would trigger a massive transformation. Defense budgets would surge. Military cooperation would deepen. The European Union might push for a unified army. Germany could rearm at an unprecedented scale. France might take a leadership role in nuclear defense. But this takes time, years, possibly decades, and during that transition, Europe is vulnerable because building power is slow, but exploiting weakness is fast. Another challenge emerges from within. NATO has always depended on unity. But unity is not guaranteed. Different countries have different priorities, different threat perceptions, different political systems. Some may push for stronger defense. Others may seek diplomacy. Some may even question NATO's relevance entirely. Without the U.S. acting as a stabilizing force, these divisions widen, trust weakens, coordination suffers, and the alliance begins to feel less like a shield and more like a fragile agreement. The impact wouldn't be limited to Europe. The entire global order would shift. Allies in Asia would question American commitments. Adversaries would test new boundaries. Power blocks would realign. New alliances could emerge. Old ones could collapse. Because NATO is not just a military alliance. It is a symbol, a signal of Western unity. Without the U.S., that signal fades, and in its place, uncertainty grows. History gives us clues. Before NATO, Europe was defined by shifting alliances, temporary agreements, fragile balances of power, and repeated conflict. The two world wars were born from instability, from miscalculation, from failed deterrence. NATO changed that. It created stability through strength, but removed its strongest pillar and history doesn't repeat exactly. But it often rhymes. There is another possibility, a more optimistic path. Europe adapts, quickly, decisively. Nations unite. Military integration accelerates. A new independent NATO emerges, stronger, more balanced, less reliant on any single power. In this scenario, the absence of the U.S. becomes a catalyst, a turning point, a moment that forces Europe to stand on its own. But even in this best-case outcome, the transition is dangerous, because power vacuums rarely remain empty. Now imagine the alternative. Division deepens, coordination fails. Defense remains fragmented. Adversaries exploit the gap. Small conflicts escalate, trust collapses, and NATO begins to fade, not with a single event, but with a slow erosion, until one day it exists only in name. So what is the truth about NATO without the United States? It is not instant collapse, but it is not stability either. It is uncertainty, a fragile balance between adaptation and vulnerability. A race between rebuilding strength and facing new threats. NATO would survive, but it would not be the same, because for decades its power has not just been about numbers, it has been about confidence. And confidence is harder to rebuild than armies. The screen fades to black. The map returns, Europe still there, borders still glowing, but something feels different, uncertain, unresolved, and one final question emerges. If one pillar can change everything, what happens when the entire system begins to shift?